A rancher stands frozen at the train station, staring at his mail-order bride. She's obese, one arm missing, nothing like her photograph. The crowd watches, waiting for him to send her back. But when their eyes meet, he sees something that breaks him. The same desperate hope he's been hiding for 3 years. Now he has seconds to decide everything. Before we dive into the story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more heartwarming stories tomorrow. Also, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Now, let's continue with the story. Clara Whitfield descended awkwardly from the passenger car, her considerable weight making each step careful and deliberate. One sleeve of her travel dress hung empty, pinned neatly at the shoulder. Her face was round and flushed from the journey. Nothing like the delicate features in the photograph burning a hole in Silas's pocket. The station master's eyes went wide. A snicker rippled through the small crowd waiting for arrivals. Silas felt his chest tighten with something between panic and shame. This couldn't be right. There had to be some mistake. But Clara's eyes found his across the platform, and in them he saw something terribly familiar. The look of someone bracing for rejection. Someone who'd been here before and knew exactly how this story ended. She stood there with her single hand gripping a battered carpet bag, her chin lifted in defiance, even as her eyes betrayed her fear, waiting for him to say the words, waiting for him to send her back. The whispers grew louder. The station master smirked. Silas's mind raced through his options like a trapped animal looking for escape. He could put her right back on that train, claim fraud, demand his money back from the marriage broker. Everyone would understand. He'd be the victim of a cruel deception. But then what? Return to his empty ranch, to rooms that echoed with loneliness, to a life that had felt like slow suffocation for 3 long years? Clara took a tentative step forward, then another. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that he could see the resignation settling over her features like dust. She'd been weighed and found wanting. Again, she knew it before he even opened his mouth. But when Silas finally spoke, the words surprised them both. "I've got a wagon out front," he said quietly, reaching for her bag. "It's a long ride to the ranch. We should get going before dark." Clara's eyes widened in shock. Her hand trembled as she released the carpet bag to him. Neither of them smiled. Neither pretended this was anything but what it was. A desperate man and a desperate woman, both too broken to walk away from their last chance at something other than loneliness. Silas turned toward the wagon, and after a moment's hesitation, Clara followed. Behind them, the whispers turned to outright gossip. By morning, everyone in 3 territories would know. The lonely rancher finally got his mail-order bride. And Lord help him, she wasn't what anyone expected. The wagon wheels carved through red dirt as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. 2 hours had passed. Neither had spoken a word. Silas kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead, his knuckles bone white against the leather reins. Beside him, Clara sat rigid as a corpse, her remaining hand clutching that carpet bag like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The silence between them had weight. It pressed down heavier than the afternoon heat, suffocating and thick with everything neither dared to say. Silas wanted to ask her about the photograph, about why she'd sent a lie instead of the truth. But shame stopped his tongue because part of him understood exactly why. Desperation makes liars of honest people. He'd written his own lies in those letters, hadn't he? Painted himself as a successful rancher, with a thriving spread when the truth was far grimmer. A man barely holding on, drowning in debt and memories. Clara kept waiting for him to stop the wagon, to turn around. She'd watched the landscape grow more isolated with each passing mile, civilization falling away until there was nothing but endless prairie and distant mesas. No witnesses out here. No one to see if he decided to leave her stranded in the middle of nowhere. It had nearly happened once before, with the second man who'd rejected her. He'd driven her halfway back to the station before his conscience caught up with his disgust. But Silas didn't turn around. The ranch finally came into view as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and blood. It wasn't much. A modest house with weathered wood siding, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, corrals that needed mending, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and harder times. But something about it made Clara's throat tighten. Maybe it was the flower boxes beneath the windows, empty now, but suggesting someone had once cared about beauty here. Or maybe it was simply that it looked as lonely as she felt. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down without a word. He stood there for a moment, staring at his own front door like it belonged to a stranger. Then he walked around to Clara's side and offered his hand. She looked at it, surprised. Most men wouldn't touch her if they could avoid it. But his hand stayed there, steady and waiting. She took it. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. He helped her down with more gentleness than she'd expected, though he still wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'll show you inside," he said quietly, his voice rusty from disuse. "You must be tired." It wasn't a declaration of acceptance. It wasn't a promise. But it also wasn't rejection. For now, in this moment suspended between one life and another, it was enough. Clara followed him toward the door, neither of them knowing that this awkward kindness was the first thread of something that would eventually weave them both back together. The kitchen table sat between them like a canyon. Silas fumbled with the coffee pot, his hands shaking as he tried to remember how to be hospitable. The coffee came out weak and bitter, but Clara accepted the cup without complaint. She'd tasted worse. She'd endured worse. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, and Clara realized if she didn't speak first, they might sit here drowning in it all night. "The photograph was taken 5 years ago," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Before the accident." Silas's hand froze halfway to his mouth. "I worked in a textile factory in Philadelphia. The machinery was old, dangerous. Everyone knew it. One day the loom I was operating jammed. I reached in to clear it, and someone started the machine before I could pull back." She gestured to her empty sleeve with a matter-of-fact calm that somehow made it worse. "They couldn't save the arm. Infection set in too fast." Silas set his cup down carefully, unable to look away now. Clara continued, her words coming faster as if speaking them might finally purge the poison. "The pain medication they gave me made me gain weight, 60 pounds in 6 months. Then depression took the rest. I stopped caring what I looked like, because no one looked at me anyway. Not the way they used to." She laughed, a bitter sound. "The photographer who took my wedding portrait, he convinced me that angles and lighting could hide enough truth to get me west. To get me a husband before he realized what he'd gotten." "You're not a liar," Silas said quietly. Clara's eyes snapped to his, searching for mockery and finding none. "You're just desperate." He pushed back from the table and stood, and for a terrible moment Clara thought he was walking away. Instead, he rolled up his right sleeve. The burns covering his forearm and shoulder made Clara inhale sharply. The scarred flesh twisted in angry knots, old but still vicious-looking. 3 years ago," Silas said, his voice hollow. "House fire. My wife and our unborn child were inside." The words hung in the air like smoke. "I was drunk. We'd been fighting. I knocked over a lamp and the whole place went up like kindling. She died calling my name while I stood outside, too much of a coward to go back in." He rolled his sleeve back down with deliberate slowness. "Been punishing myself ever since. Figured I deserved every lonely day, every empty night." Clara stood and walked to him, closing the distance he'd created. With her single hand, she reached out and touched his scarred forearm through the fabric. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" she whispered. Silas looked at her finally, really looked at her, and saw not what was missing but what remained. Two people so broken they'd stopped believing in repair. Two people who'd traveled across a continent hoping strangers might be kinder than the ones who knew their shame. He didn't pull away from her touch. For the first time in 3 years, he let himself be seen. 3 weeks passed, in a rhythm neither had expected. Clara woke before dawn and moved through the kitchen with surprising efficiency. She'd wedge bowls against her hip, pin ingredients with her elbow, her single hand working with the precision of someone who'd spent years adapting to a world built for two. Silas would come in from morning chores to find fresh bread cooling on the counter, the smell filling rooms that hadn't known warmth in years. He never said anything. But Clara noticed he started lingering at breakfast instead of bolting his food and escaping outside. She learned his patterns. How he avoided the bedroom at the end of the hall where his wife had died. How he'd sometimes stop mid-task and stare at nothing, lost in memories that still had teeth. How he was gentler with the animals than he was with himself. One morning she found wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, purple and yellow blooms that hadn't been there the night before. Silas was already outside working, and when he came in for lunch, neither mentioned them. But the next week, there were more. Silas started noticing things too. How Clara hummed while she worked, old hymns his mother used to sing. How she'd rearrange the pantry so everything was within easy reach. How she never complained, never asked for help unless absolutely necessary. Her pride was a fierce thing. One afternoon, he watched her struggle with the clothesline, trying to pin sheets with one hand while the wind fought her. He almost went to help, but stopped himself. She'd figure it out. She always did. But the next day, he built her a new line at shoulder height with special hooks she could manage alone. He installed it while she was gathering eggs and never mentioned it. That evening, Clara stood looking at it for a long time before quietly hanging the laundry. They began talking during meals. Small things at first. Clara told him about Philadelphia, about her sister who died of consumption when they were girls. Silas spoke about his father's ranch in Texas, about learning to break horses before he could read. The conversations were careful, both of them testing the ice to see what it could hold. But gradually, the words came easier. One night, Clara laughed at something Silas said about a stubborn mule, and the sound startled them both. Her laugh was rich and full. Nothing like the careful politeness she usually maintained. Silas smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, and realized he couldn't remember the last time his face had made that expression. They weren't lovers. They barely touched except by accident. But something was growing in the spaces between them, in the wildflowers left unspoken and the clotheslines built without fanfare. Something that felt dangerously close to hope, neither dared name it. Hope was a luxury people couldn't afford, but it bloomed anyway, stubborn as weeds pushing through stone. The trip to town had been inevitable. They'd run low on supplies, and Silas couldn't postpone it any longer. Clara had straightened her dress 3 times before they left, her anxiety bleeding through every careful adjustment. "They'll stare," she'd said quietly. Silas had only nodded. He knew they would. The general store fell silent when they walked in. Conversations died mid-sentence. Mrs. Calloway, the shopkeeper's wife, rushed forward with a smile so sweet it could rot teeth. "Oh, my dear, you must be exhausted from all that walking. Let me get you our sturdiest chair." The emphasis on sturdiest landed like a slap. Other women huddled near the fabric display, their whispers sharp as broken glass. Clara's face remained expressionless, but Silas saw her hand tighten on the shopping list. Outside was worse. A group of ranch hands loitered by the saloon, bored and looking for entertainment. They found it when Clara struggled to balance packages against her body with one arm. "Hey, Brennan," one of them called out, a kid named Rafferty with more mouth than sense. "Looks like the catalog sent you damaged goods. You try returning her?" The others erupted in laughter. Another one chimed in. "Maybe they charge by the pound. That's why Silas is so broke now." Something snapped inside Silas like a frozen branch. He set down the supplies he was carrying and walked straight toward Rafferty. The kid's grin faltered. "I was just joking. No harm meant." Silas didn't slow down. His fist connected with Rafferty's jaw with a crack that echoed down the street. The ranch hand went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. The laughter died instantly. Silas stood over him, his voice low and deadly. "You got something else to say about my wife?" The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Silas walked back to Clara, picked up her packages along with his own, and offered her his arm. She took it, her eyes wide with shock. Together they walked down the main street with every eye in town watching. Silas kept his head high, daring anyone to say another word. No one did. The ride home was quiet again, but different this time. Clara kept glancing at Silas, at his bruised knuckles on the reins. When they reached the ranch, he went straight to the porch and sat heavily, cradling his swelling hand. Clara disappeared inside and returned with a basin of cool water and clean cloth. She sat beside him and gently took his hand in hers, cleaning the blood away with careful attention. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. Silas looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his chest. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." They sat together as the sun set, her hand holding his, neither one alone anymore. The storm hit without warning, the way they always did in the territory. One moment the sky was clear. The next it turned black as coal, lightning splitting the heavens with violent cracks. Silas was securing the barn door when he heard the horse scream. Thunder, his best stallion, was losing his mind in the stall, crashing against the walls hard enough to break bones. The animal had always been terrified of storms, a fear born from being caught in a wildfire as a colt. Silas rushed inside, but the horse was beyond reason, eyes rolling white, hooves striking out at anything close. Then Clara appeared, the barn doorway soaked through from the rain, her dress clinging to her body. "Get back!" Silas shouted. But she ignored him completely. She moved toward the crazed animal with calm determination, singing something soft and low, a lullaby, or maybe a hymn. Thunder's ears flicked toward the sound. Clara kept singing, kept moving closer despite the danger. With her single hand, she reached out slowly, letting the horse smell her, her voice never wavering even when lightning struck close enough to shake the ground. Gradually, impossibly, Thunder began to calm. His breathing slowed. The wild panic faded from his eyes. Clara's hand found his neck, stroking gently, still singing. Silas stood frozen, watching this woman who'd been too afraid to meet his eyes a month ago now, facing down 1,000 pounds of terrified muscle without hesitation. When Thunder finally settled, lowering his head against Clara's shoulder, Silas felt something crack open inside his chest. Back in the house, both of them dripping puddles onto the floor, rain hammering the roof like fists. Silas couldn't hold it anymore. The words poured out of him like poison from a lanced wound. He told her everything. How he'd been drinking for months before the fire, trying to drown the knowledge that his marriage was hollow. How his wife had been packing to leave that night, her bags already by the door. How they'd screamed at each other, and he'd stumbled, knocked over the lamp. How the flames spread faster than thought. How he'd made it outside, but she'd gone back for something, some stupid trinket, and never came out. How her screams had haunted him every night since. How he'd told everyone it was an accident, but the truth was uglier. The truth was he'd destroyed everything through his own weakness. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finally stopped, empty and raw, she crossed the kitchen. She took his face in her hand, forcing him to look at her. "You can't carry that alone anymore," she said, fiercely. "I won't let you." Then she kissed him, soft and deliberate, tasting like rain, and something that felt dangerously like forgiveness. Silas kissed her back, desperate and grateful, and felt the weight he'd carried for 3 years finally begin to shift. Something shifted after the storm. The careful distance they'd maintained began to crumble. Silas started finding excuses to be near Clara, to brush past her in the kitchen, to let his hand linger when passing her things. She responded in kind, leaning into those moments instead of pulling away. The air between them grew charged with possibility. One morning, Silas asked if she'd like to see the rest of the ranch. Not just the house and barn, but the places he'd kept to himself. Clara agreed without hesitation. He took her to a hidden spring fed by underground water, where deer came at dawn to drink. The pool was crystal clear, reflecting sky and clouds like a mirror. "I used to come here when the house felt too full of ghosts," he admitted. Clara squeezed his hand, understanding without words. The next day he showed her the ridge where 3 territories met, where you could see forever in every direction. They sat on sun-warmed rocks, while Silas pointed out landmarks, his voice animated in ways she'd never heard. Clara watched him instead of the view, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his whole face changed when he forgot to be haunted. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "Nothing," she said. "Everything. The shooting lesson happened by accident. Clara mentioned she'd always wanted to learn, and Silas pulled out his rifle before he could overthink it. He positioned her at the fence post, showed her how to brace the stock against her shoulder, how to compensate for having only one hand by using the fence for support. When he reached around her to adjust her grip, his chest pressed against her back, his breath warm on her neck, time seemed to suspend. Their hands met on the rifle, and neither moved to break the contact. "Clara," Silas said quietly, his voice rough. She turned her head slightly, their faces inches apart. "Can I kiss you?" The question hung between them, terrifying and essential. Her yes was barely a whisper, but it was enough. The kiss was tentative at first, both of them afraid of shattering something precious. But then Clara turned fully into his arms, and the kiss deepened, became real. Silas pulled her closer, his scarred arms around her substantial frame. And for the first time in either of their lives, they felt wanted. Not tolerated, not settled for, wanted. That night, Clara moved her things from the guest room to his. No grand declarations, no dramatic moment. Just a quiet choice made by two people who'd stopped fighting what they both needed. Silas held her as they fell asleep, her head on his chest, his hand tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. Outside, coyotes called to the moon. Inside, two broken people discovered that sometimes the pieces that don't fit anywhere else fit perfectly together. The rider appeared on the horizon just after noon, his horse too fine for ranch work, his suit too clean for honest travel. Silas recognized his brother before Nathaniel even dismounted. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since Nathaniel had moved to Denver and started making real money in banking. The kind of money that bought opinions and the arrogance to share them. "Brother," Nathaniel said, his greeting cool as spring water. His eyes swept the ranch with thinly veiled disappointment before landing on Clara, who'd emerged from the house wiping flour from her hand. His expression shifted to something between shock and revulsion, quickly masked, but not quickly enough. Clara saw it. She'd seen that look 100 times before. "You must be the bride," Nathaniel said, his tone suggesting she was anything but. Dinner was excruciating. Nathaniel made polite conversation that dripped with condescension, asking Clara about her condition, as if losing an arm was a disease. He complimented the food with surprise that someone in her situation could cook so well. Every word was a knife wrapped in silk. Silas's jaw got tighter with each passing minute, but Clara remained composed, her face revealing nothing. After Clara excused herself to clean up, Nathaniel wasted no time. "We need to talk," he said, pulling Silas onto the porch. "I know a lawyer in Denver who specializes in annulments. Mail-order marriages are easy to dissolve, especially when there's been clear misrepresentation." He said the word like it tasted foul. "You're entitled to compensation for defective merchandise. I can have papers drawn up by next week." "Defective merchandise?" Silas repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Nathaniel pressed on, oblivious. "Look, I understand you were lonely, but you're a Brennan. We have standards. That woman is not fit to carry our family name. She's fat, she's crippled, and frankly, she's an embarrassment. Let me help you fix this mistake before it gets worse." The screen door creaked. Both men turned. Clara stood there, her face carved from stone, her carpetbag in her hand. She'd heard everything, every poisonous word. The look in her eyes was worse than anger. It was resignation. The familiar acceptance of someone who'd always known this moment would come. "I'll save you the trouble," she said quietly, her voice steady, despite the devastation bleeding through. She walked past both of them toward the barn. Silas started after her, but Nathaniel grabbed his arm. "Let her go!" "It's for the best." Silas looked at his brother's hand on his sleeve, then at his brother's face, and saw a stranger wearing familiar features. Clara was already saddling Thunder, moving with practiced efficiency despite her shaking hands. She was leaving, and Silas had about 30 seconds to decide who he was going to be. Silas found Clara by the creek, sitting on the bank with her carpetbag beside her, like a faithful dog. She didn't turn when his boots crunched through the grass. Thunder grazed nearby, still saddled, waiting. The evening light painted everything gold and amber, beautiful in a way that made the moment hurt worse. "You should go back to the house," Clara said flatly. "Your brother's waiting." Silas sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Let him wait." They sat in silence for a long moment, watching water slide over smooth stones. Finally, Silas spoke. "I need to tell you about Elizabeth, my first wife." Clara's breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. "Everyone said I was lucky to marry her. She was beautiful, came from a good family. On paper, we were perfect." He picked up a rock and turned it over in his scarred hands. "But beautiful isn't the same as happy. We were strangers who shared a bed. She wanted things I couldn't give her. I drank to avoid facing how empty it all was." He threw the rock into the creek, watching ripples spread. "The night of the fire, she wasn't just leaving for a visit. She was leaving me, for good. Her bags were packed. We were screaming at each other about all the ways we'd failed. I was drunk and angry and knocked over that lamp." His voice cracked. "It wasn't some tragic accident. We destroyed each other long before the flames touched anything." Clara finally looked at him, tears streaming down her face. Silas met her eyes, his own wet. "I spent 3 years mourning what I lost, but the truth is simpler. I never had it. Not the way I thought. I was alone in that marriage from the beginning." He reached for her hand, held it tight. "These last 2 months with you, I've discovered something I didn't know existed. You make me laugh. You make me want to be better. When I wake up, I'm grateful you're there. When I come in from working, I look forward to seeing you. That's not obligation, Clara. That's not pity. That's something I never had before." "Your brother's right," Clara whispered. "I'm not what you ordered. I'm not what any man would choose." Silas cupped her face with both hands, forcing her to see the truth in his eyes. "You're exactly what I needed. I just didn't know it until you stepped off that train." He kissed her then, desperate and certain, pouring everything he couldn't say into that single moment. Clara kissed him back, her tears mixing with his, and felt 3 lifetimes of rejection finally begin to dissolve. When they broke apart, both breathless, Silas stood and offered his hand. "Come home," he said simply. Clara took it, left her carpet bag where it lay, and chose the life they were building together over the fear that had ruled her for so long. 6 months changed everything. The ranch that had felt like a graveyard now hummed with life. Clara's garden defied every expectation, vegetables pushing through stubborn soil because she refused to accept that broken things couldn't grow. Tomatoes hung heavy on vines. Squash sprawled across the ground like conquering armies. Even the roses she'd planted by the porch bloomed despite the harsh climate, their petals soft as promises kept. Silas built her a workshop in the barn, a table designed specifically for one-handed work. Clara discovered she had a gift for leatherwork, creating saddlebags and belts with intricate tooling that drew admiration even from people who'd mocked her months before. The same townspeople who'd whispered behind gloved hands now paid premium prices for her craftsmanship. Mrs. Calloway herself had commissioned a custom purse, though she couldn't quite meet Clara's eyes when she picked it up. Nathaniel never returned. Silas had ordered him off the property that same night, choosing Clara over blood without hesitation. His brother's final words had been bitter predictions of failure and regret. But standing on the porch now, watching Clara prune her roses with specialized shears he'd designed for her, Silas felt nothing but gratitude for that choice. Some family you're born into. Some you build from scratch. The evenings were their favorite time. They'd sit together watching the sun paint the sky in impossible colors, Clara's head resting on Silas's shoulder, his arm around her waist. Her empty sleeve no longer felt like something to hide. His scars no longer burned with shame. They were simply part of the story of how they'd found each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked one night, her voice soft. "Opening that telegram? Coming to meet me at the station?" Silas pulled her closer. "Every day I regret only one thing. That it took me so long to realize what I had." A train whistle echoed across the plains, distant and lonely, carrying other hopeful souls toward uncertain futures. Silas thought about the man he'd been that day on the platform, clutching a photograph and expecting something so different. That man had been looking for an escape from loneliness. What he'd found instead was infinitely better. A partner, an equal. Someone who saw his darkness and didn't flinch. Someone whose own scars made her understand his in ways beauty never could. Clara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "I love you," she said simply. 3 words she'd never believed she'd have the right to speak. Silas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "I love you too, not despite anything, just because of everything you are." Above them, stars wheeled across an endless sky. Inside them, 2 hearts that had been broken in different ways beat in perfect rhythm, proof that the best things in life rarely look like what we expect. Sometimes they look better. If you've made it this far, click that like button and subscribe, because tomorrow we've got another story that'll remind you why love always finds a way, even when the whole world says it shouldn't. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.